Good evening, everybody. Today is Tuesday, March 4th, and if you're tuning in from home, you are watching the first of our department budget meetings with the Board of Finance, and we're hosting the Board of Education this evening. If you would all rise, join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence. And I would ask that you keep a member of our TPS family, John Capello and his wife, Rachel, in your hearts this evening, as well as their sons, Jake and Jared, as they've lost their son, Josh, this week, who was a member of the class of 2019 and a family friend. So if you would all hold them in your thoughts this evening. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'm going to ask Phyllis to take roll call attendance this evening because we have a lot of people on this meeting. And while she's getting ready to do that, I'll remind everybody that there are no public comments tonight, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Sather? Yeah. Are you doing town council first? Yeah. Okay, town council finance committee members first.
Just turn the mic on again.
Can't read my handwriting. Ann Sather? Here. Okay. Richard Wolf? Mary Isaac? Here. Tony Cinto? Nikki Satin?
Here.
Kevin Shively? Anthony Dorsey? Here. John Foreman? Paul Timpanelli? Here. Laney McHugh?
Here.
David Galla?
Here.
Scott Zemov?
Here.
Marty Isaac?
Here.
Chris Alaris?
Here.
Mark Mascola? Rosemary Seaman?
Here.
Vincent DeGennaro?
Here.
Okay. Martin Semmel?
Here.
Paul Hendrickson?
Here.
Joe Cella?
Here.
Dean Catalano? Susan Iwanek? I would have figured it out. Christina Heffley?
Here.
Kevin Dion?
Here.
Lucinda Tipinelli?
Here.
Tim Gallo?
I'm here.
Jackie Norcell?
Here.
Allison Squichamaro? Here. Marie Petiti? Christopher Bendici? Here. Julia McNamee?
Here.
And Lisa Newland? Here. Okay, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Through the magic of hybrid meetings, we're able to have Julia and Scott and Rosemary join us this evening. Bill has been watching like the whiz, and I'm much appreciative for his help this evening in getting everything organized. Tonight begins the Board of Finance phase of the 2025-2026 budget process here in Trumbull. This is my 9th budget season on this side of the desk, and I spent 10 years involved from the other side of the railing. I want to take a moment to acknowledge all of our department heads, including the TPS administration, and most importantly, Maria Pires, our finance director, and her department for all the intricate work and detail that goes into this process. I am and always have been in awe of the amount of work that it takes to get a budget proposal to this point, all while the day-to-day operations for the current year need to get done. Mrs. Tesoro has agonized over each department's request and the delicate balance between needs and wants. It's my personal goal as chair that all come away from this process with the feeling that this board has treated them with the respect that they deserve. I also want to acknowledge my board and thank them for the work and time that they put in. They're volunteers all. They have well prepared for these discussions by attending Board of Education budget meetings, other town meetings, and participating in sessions from the Public Works to learn about everything from paving to plowing and the flow of poop. This is a board of talent and experience, and I'm privileged to be a part of it. Special thanks to Vin DeGennaro for taking the time to do follow-up for cost benefit screening and feasibility for combining Town and Board of Education IT services. It was a discussion from last year, and I want people to understand that we do follow through on ideas of all kinds. It is the willingness to ask hard questions and think outside the box that demonstrate our commitment to work in the best interest of all of Trumbull. In accordance with our charter, the First Selectman has transmitted her budget proposal to the Board of Finance as of the first Monday in March, and the Board of Finance begins our review by hosting the Board of Education this evening in the first of our department hearings. We will continue our meetings with all town departments on Tuesday, March 11th and Tuesday, March 18th. Those meetings will be conducted via Zoom and available to the public live stream. Those schedules have been posted on the town website. We will also host 2 public hearings on Thursday, March 13th at 7 p.m. before our regular scheduled meeting, and Saturday, March 22nd at 10 a.m. Both of those are scheduled here in council chambers, and we're hoping to have them be hybrid meetings with an opportunity for the public to attend and comment remotely. Hopefully, all the new technology is in place and working well, and Bill won't hate me too much for asking for that. Every year, I think we are in the most challenging of budget cycles. I'm hopeful that the coming year will be easier. Yet, here we are again with the most daunting task to meet the demands of providing for critical services, public safety, and education in a most unpredictable economy. So before we begin tonight's presentation, for some perspective, almost a decade ago, one of our Board of Finance members lamented that the cost of education is rising exponentially faster than is sustainable. And if we continue to expect 3 to 4% growth every year, before we know it, the budget will be at $130 million. In 2013-14, we had 6,824 students, 602 identified as special education, and a total Board of Education operating budget of $90,789,175. By 2019-20, the enrollment had dipped only slightly to 6,808, but our ID SPED number increased to 825. The operating budget grew to $106,118,332. And by last year, the operating budget for the Board of Education was $124,530,402, servicing 6,943 students with 988 ID'd as special education, which is 14.8% of our student population. We'll talk about comparisons and stuff later, but just to give you a relative idea of the growth in our budget discussions. And as we begin our discussions for the 25-26 year, we have a request reaching that before you know it number of $130 million. So let me be clear. I truly believe that every dollar we're able to spend on education is a worthwhile investment. That's me, personally. We can never pay our teachers what they're truly worth, and extracurricular activities are the heart of turning our students into good citizens. I also believe it's not how much we spend on education, but how much we value education in our community and homes that sets Trumbull apart. For far too long, we've allowed political climate to make the municipal budget season feel like a we versus they. So as we begin our discussions tonight, I want all of us to level the playing field with an understanding that we are all in the same team. No matter the outcome, we'll need to look beyond Trumbull to conquer ECS formulas and external factors to make growth and progress for TPS sustainable for generations to come. There was one piece of good news today. I did hear that the legislature did find a way to honor the $40 million in excess cost reimbursement, that they're going to find a way to work that out when the governor had line item vetoed it yesterday. So I'm very hopeful that we'll have positive things to talk about in days to come. So with that, I want to welcome Dr. Semmel and the Board of Education here tonight to talk about the budget request before us.
Well, that's good news. What you're saying is that they did find the 40 million for us for this year. I thought there was a vote tomorrow, so I really wasn't even paying that much attention today. So looking forward to going back and seeing that, because that will make an impact for this year.
That was as of the 6 o'clock news and a report from one of TPS's own on Channel 8. So.
Excellent. That's good. I was preparing for this and not watching the news tonight. So, but it is. I appreciate the words you said about the budget, and I especially appreciate your words about the fact that we're all in this together and that we're on the same team, because it is going to be a tough I guess, game to play this year. And it's good to know that we're all on the same team working for our children, making sure that they get what they need for an education. Because things have gotten more challenging. A lot of different things are causing that, and we'll talk about some of those issues that are affecting education. But I do want to thank the Board of Finance and the members of the Town Council's Finance Committee. I do know that especially the month of March and probably beyond is very busy, because I look at your schedule and it has a lot. What we attempted to do this year, now that this is my 5th presentation, I think, to the Board of Finance, we tried to streamline some of the slides. I had shared the two budget presentations to the Board of Education, which had more slides in it. But in order to kind of reduce this particular part of the presentation, just to make the assumption you read through those slides, and then I'm going to hit some of the highlights from this presentation that are tailored to the Board of Finance members. So our goal is to try to keep ourselves to about 20-25 minutes total. We hope that's what it's going to be. It's going to be mostly me and Mr. Catalano from Special Education doing the overall presentation, and then all of us will be prepared to answer questions as we go. So getting into it, first of all, I do want to just identify the fact that there's a lot of people that go into developing our budget. It is a lot of work, and we are running the schools while we're putting this together. So I do want to a shout out to the full Board of Education, because they are very engaged in the process of developing the budget from the beginning, from September, October, actually even into July and August when we set our goals for the year. So they've been along with this budget development process for many, many months, and most of them are able to be present with us tonight. I also want to appreciate the administrators and teachers and staff who've also helped put this budget together. It's really nice to see the number of people, a number of administrators who are able to be out here. 2 of them, Michelle Malloy and Brian Rickard, actually have birthdays today. I didn't know you were baking a cake for them. But that's dedication when, you're here celebrating your birthday. So, but I appreciate all the administrators and all the time and effort that they put into the work at each of their schools, but also the night events that they do. And this is another opportunity to come out and support schools. You know our goals. We have 3 major goals that we focus on each year. So I'm just going to move through that. Our expenses, though, this is going to be a lot about the challenges of this particular year. We thought that this particular comic is appropriate. Most of the money went to just trying to stay afloat. And when we look at what we need, the status quo budget to move forward, just everything we have this year. So if we just take what we have in terms of staff and programs and services and move it forward based on the anticipated increases in costs, it's actually 4.87% increase, which to me, of course, just seems like a really high number just to take things and move forward. But when you look at this particular slide, you can see, and we've talked about this many, many years, and you've heard about it if you've been on the board for 8 years or 9 years, how many, you see that $2 million of this $6 million request, and this is just the status quo budget, is for salary increases. These are generally contractual increases. That amounts to $2 million. The benefits this year is really just staggering. The fact is we have a 13% increase in this particular budget. It's what we were told, and the town was told the same thing because we're actually in the same state partnership plan at this point. $2.6 million. I think Mr. Hendrickson was sharing some information with me earlier that if we had the same insurance increase as we did last year, we would be looking at about a 3.57% increase in our status quo budget. Those are the numbers that I remember him and I talking about. So if we had the same increase, we wouldn't be looking at this 4.87. That's the impact that cost of insurance is having to our budget this year. Do we know it'll be 13%? No. And we know by the end of March we'll have a final number from the state. as long as they stay true to their word about that. And then when you look at the rest of the $6 million, transportation, that's contractual. You see the utilities and energy, but that's not a huge part. And then in the other piece, and Mr. Hendrickson could go through that at some point in this presentation if you would like him to. You see on the left-hand side what the Board of Ed approved also included $1 million of additional staff and programs, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But that $6 million just to keep us afloat is generally benefits and salaries. And that salaries is really higher than what we would predict. And there's some notes at the bottom. The assumption here is that the health benefits are increasing by 13%. That's behind that little red arrow there. And the ECR is going up by 67%. Now, I was prepared to say 67 might be a little ambitious, but because this year we got 60%, but now if the news is correct, we're going to get closer to 72% if they went with that $40 million. So what will happen, though, in the fiscal year 26 budget of the governor's biennium budget? Because he did not put any additional money into ECR for the 26 year. He pushes a lot that I'm adding $54 million to ECR. That only comes in the second year of the biennium budget. So that guess of what the ECR percentage is going to be is a challenge for us to try to guess what that's going to be. So I think 67 is a little bit more accurate. I have hope that the legislative body will be able to get more money into the biennium budget in the year 26. But I put this slide up here first to just kind of level set where we are and why our number is higher this year than you might have wanted. Some of the good news, I'll go through these quickly. We know that Trumbull has done very well with the resources that we have. We believe we're extremely efficient. We believe that our administrators and teachers work so well together with our students and our parents to collaborate to help have our students really achieve here. So, Trumbull continues to rank high in the accountability scores. Number 6. We've had 6 out of 6 elementary schools getting schools of distinction for the past 2 years and 5 out of 6 over the past 3 years. That's quite an honor. One thing that we think is really important, though, is you notice that Trumbull's changing a bit. One thing I want to highlight is your English learners from 2014-15 to currently went from 130 to right now is 314. So we have a number of students who are learning English as a second language. So that's impactful on the schools, and the teachers and the staff have to work with students about this. Another piece I think to point out on this page, free and reduced lunch eligibility has also almost doubled in the past 10 years. So that's significant as well. Is it as significant as the inner cities? Not even close. Not even close to inner city kind of numbers. But you are seeing a rise in free and reduced lunch prices. And I don't want to cast all people who are on free and reduced lunch as needing support, but we generally know that we'll need to provide some additional support to some students who are on free and reduced lunch. We just know that support increases. Certainly kids who are on fully paid lunch also need support. But as that number goes up, you're going to need to see additional support. We also think it is important to just keep pointing out that there are a ton of things that just keep coming at us from the legislative body or from the federal situation. I think I've been an administrator almost 20 plus years now, I think I've seen 8 to 10 changes in the bullying laws. They just constantly change them, and we're constantly trying to keep up with them. And what's the new rules about bullying, and what are we supposed to do now? So now we've got other additional responsibilities around requiring restorative practice and all these different challenging behaviors, which we'll get up to speed on it. We'll get it figured out. Title IX legislation. It was 2020, then it was 2024 regulations. Now it's 2020 again. So they keep, that's got challenges into itself. You might have heard Connecticut paid sick leave laws. On the basis, it sounds like a great idea, but when you have a substitute teacher coming in and can take maybe an hour off in the middle of the day without questions asked, that can cause a problem. Teachers leaving from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., it's in the law, but it certainly causes problems. And we're trying to get them to take municipalities out of that particular law and just let the contract language stand. Rising 401A costs. I'm going to show you some of those costs. Electricity. Anybody here happy about their electricity bills over the past year? $250,000 more than we budgeted for this school year because of the public benefit piece. And we know it's supposed to stop in April, but does anybody believe that electricity costs right now are about to go down? I'm not betting on it on my own home budget, and I'm not betting on it here. Science of reading mandate, we must put it in for next year. We've done a lot of very good work around this, but it is a mandate, and it is going to cost us money. Special education outplacements. We're going to show you some slides where we've got 10% increases for some of those. And those bills come in April and May. We don't even know what the next increase is for 25, 26. We won't know until May, maybe sometimes it's even June, where they go, oh, here's the increase. Well, last year they were told it was 10.8% in some cases. Excess cost reimbursement, we've talked about that quite a bit. ECS, I know Ms. Tesoro she's a champion trying to make sure she gets every dollar for Trumbull. I know she's out there talking to legislators and trying to understand why we're not getting more money on ECS. And we have no idea what's going to happen to title grants. I believe they're going to stay mostly intact, but we do see some of our districts who've lost title grant money this year. And then we've got things like indoor air quality and aging buildings. So there's a lot that comes at school districts. And so it's not just reading, writing, and math, right? We constantly, and who knows what they're planning for this year. Cool, but you know they're doing something. And you know there's going to be something that we have to pay for that we don't even know right now what that is. Maybe we all have to buy Yonder pouches because they put it into law that we have to do that. You might not even know what I'm talking about. So our Board of Education request approved unanimously by the Board of Education was a 5.89% increase. As we said, that's primarily salaries and benefits. We also tried to do some things like eliminating the strings and band participation fee. The insurance is in there, health premium costs. We're assuming $675,000 of staff savings through staff turnover. As a reminder, in my first year of budgeting, I was following what they had done previously, which was put about $300,000 of staff turnover savings. It's not as easy to say. So we upped that this year to $750,000. Right now, we have not quite achieved $750,000 of staff turnover savings. I think it was 665. So we haven't quite achieved the 750. And when we were budgeting this, we knew we weren't achieving that 750. So we did bring it down slightly to 675. Also a hard number to predict because you don't know exactly how many people are going to retire and the cost to replace them, what that's going to be. So, and then there's a couple of other items here, like we've kept the pay to participate fee for athletics the same for a number of years. We do bring in that revenue to offset our budget, and we record that within our budget, and we know that our transportation costs had a contractual increase of 4.5. I mentioned the pension thing. I didn't even know about this, but as Mr. Hendricks and I were talking about it this year, he said, these pension numbers are getting higher and higher. And I said, well, let's take a look at what you mean by that. So back in 2013, it looks like, well, we all know that there was stuff that happened to the pension plan, and there was a defined contribution plan, the 401A that was created. So anytime people retired, these are non-certified staff, the grand majority of them were able to go into, the new hires were able to go into the 401A. Well, the town pension, all the expenses were paid by the town. And somehow, some way, the 401A contribution is being paid by the Board of Education funds. So in 14-15, it didn't actually really didn't hit too much. It was $12,000. Then it went to 42, then 68. You can see now we have $408,000 in the 24-25 budget for a 401A. Now, I didn't buy any extra staff with this money. I didn't get anything additional for this. It was just money that the town used to pay for this, for town pensions, and then at some point it was shifted to the Board of Education. I just think that's important to note. We anticipate that this number in today's dollars can grow to a maximum of about 1.2 million. Because this 405,000, you might be wondering, what percentage of your staff is that? It's about 33% of our staff. So the rest of them are still on the pension plan, but as they retire, the new people coming in will go on to this. So in today's dollars, it's about 1.2 million. You'd have to extrapolate that out with inflation and things like that. It's going to be higher than the 1.2. Just want to point that out, that it's a cost that we did not have back in 13. The board has now, and it's part of our numbers. Switching to something more positive, we are not going to show, to some people's happiness, we're not going to go into the net cost charts. You already know what it says and what I'm going to say about it. We know Trumbull's very efficient. This chart, hard to read when you first take a look at it, but that magenta star is Trumbull. And that particular star, it's looking at accountability index and our expenditure. So on the y-axis, you have our accountability index, which is a measure between 0 and 100. And then expenditures are basically for the net cost per student. So you can see that you'd have to be in the upper left quadrant to be outperforming Trumbull. That would mean you're paying less and achieving more. And no one's there. So that's a good thing. All the yellow people are the other DERG B districts, just so we could identify those folks. Those people that are achieving higher than us, you saw them already on an earlier slide. Those are some very wealthy DERG A districts who are outperforming us. And then you have there's Madison, Connecticut outperforming us, but they are spending, it's like 25 and some change per student to do that. Not taking away from Madison, they're good people. I know the superintendent and folks that work there. They work hard all the time. But this is just another slide to talk about our efficiency and how streamlined we've become. But I'll spare you all the other slides on net cost per child. We showed this slide similar to last year. Most of our money goes into salaries and benefits, supplies and equipment and transportation, utilities and energy, and then we get a small amount for future-ready initiatives. Student enrollment is 6,878 predicted for 25-26, so a little blip. I'll talk about that in a moment. This slide, if you see this slide for the first time, it's a lot to take in. This is the enrollment projections for 25-26. We use this to identify how many sections we think we're going to need in the elementary schools for the coming year based on our guidelines. So if the long and the short of this particular slide is we believe we can reduce by one section for next year. So you see us go from 133 to 132. Now, you've been with me for the past 5 years talking about this. It should be interesting to note we've actually, if we reduce this one for next year, we'll have reduced 12 elementary sections. 21-22, we had 144 elementary sections. And now in 25-26, we're suggesting 132. If you look at, when you take some time to look at the numbers, it's your K1-2 numbers that are lower. Those are the reasons why we've reduced. Most of your third, fourth, and fifth grade classrooms are still at that 500 plus mark for the most part. But it's your K1-2 numbers that are lower. I would not, this last bullet here, this reduction is not forever. I would bet that at some point, when all your folks who are holding on to big houses with no kids in it decide it's time to go, those houses are going to get sold because houses do not stay on the market in Trumbull long. And they're going to be filled, especially if interest rates come down and housing prices become more affordable. They're going to be filled with parents with young kids. Right now, most of the movement in we see is like 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. We see your middle school numbers are huge. You know, you got Hillcrest at 800, you've got Madison at 850 kids, very big numbers for those schools. But the elementary schools currently are a little smaller, but I wouldn't count on that staying the same. We do have some staff. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I don't believe you're going to get me beyond my 4.87, which is my status quo budget. But I do think it's important for me to know we've got the reduction in the elementary teacher, and we're looking to add a special education teacher. We've finally brought our reading interventionists and math coaches to where they need to be at the elementary schools. We've identified that the middle schools really could benefit from having their interventionists back. They do not have reading interventionists at the middle school. We really value. We've had a long set of meetings and observations of middle school classes. We believe that those interventionists would be very helpful for a number of our students. We also want to try to bring in world language to the elementary school. We had it a few years ago. You actually had it in Trumbull, then it was taken out. We tried to put it in a couple of years ago. It got cut. We're trying to put it again back to this year. I will say a number of your towns surrounding Trumbull do have world languages, and they do go below 5th grade. We did some history. We found 4th grade and 3rd grade, 2nd grade. So it's certainly not cutting edge, but it is something we believe that our students would benefit from learning a second language while they're in elementary school, while their brains are definitely adept at picking up languages. Administrators, this year we're actually completely now doing away with the director of Ag Sci. So we've been reducing, and now going into 25-6, we won't have a director of Ag Sci from an administrator position. We've moved it over where the department chair will be responsible for Ag Sci, and there'll be a house principal from Trumbull High School who will be overseeing that as well, which is actually the typical model across the state. Trumbull was a little atypical when it came to having a director also. So this gets us more in line, but reduces some of our costs there. We're going to be very sad to see Dr. Linda Pazlov go, but I think she's trying to retire again. I think she fails at retirement. So we're going to let her go this time. The director for school counseling really is taking the department chair from the high school and replacing it with an administrative position so that they can oversee all of 612 counseling. There's a lot of night meetings, there's a lot of things to be done, so making that administrative position is relatively inexpensive, but I think the value that we get from that position is outstanding. And then we talked about increasing an elementary assistant principal to support both Daniels Farm and Booth Hill, our two largest elementary schools that don't have assistant principals. So we've already talked about the health insurance, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but you see it's $2.5 million. We expect those final rates in late March. This number is based on the premium cost share that we take in from employees, so it's net of that. It's what we expect to actually pay. Transportation, you see $723,000 increase. And we break it down for you in terms of summer bus runs. Those summer runs are for our special education required programming under extended school year, also called ESY. And then you see special education in district, out of district. I still think that if you want a nice side business, special ed transportation is not a bad one, because we're spending $100,000 a child to transport them for the year. So when we get a child who's outplaced and we got to transport them, I already know Dean's going to tell me it's $100,000 because that's the going rate. So it's expensive. And that's the beauty of why things like Elite that we did, and I don't want to steal all of Dean's thunder, but things like Elite, where we keep all of our 18 to 22 kids in district, is saving us massive amounts of money. Because not just the education that they would get outplaced, it's also the transportation to get there at a very high cost. SRP program that you've had in the district for a long time is saving you a lot of money. Your REACH program is saving you money. Sorry, I know you're going to talk a little bit about that, Dean. Yeah, so actually I was heading right towards Dean. So Dean's going to take the next few slides where he's going to walk you through some of the slides that he believes are important to talk about with special education, and also things that the Board of Finance has asked questions about in the past.
Okay. I think I got a little thunder left. Little thunder. Hey, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to present an overview of the 25-26 PPS budget. This budget reflects our commitment to providing our students with disabilities with a free and appropriate public education and beyond. I just want to kind of start with a visual, a nice little Venn diagram, just what our drivers are, our priorities when we develop the budget. Of course, being in compliance and being accountable for legal, within legal statutes and legislation is incredibly important. Making sure we're growing our staff and their capacity through professional learning and supervision. Differentiated opportunities are very important. And of course, our continuum of services, which Dr. Semmel spoke a little bit about, not just in our home schools, but also REACH, Elite, SRP, Specialized Resource Program, all very important to constantly reflect on those programs. As Dr. Semmel said, the one request this year for the PPS department is the one additional special education teacher, just to keep up with the demands of the case management, of the clerical side of things, which became a little bit more arduous with the advent of CT SEDS. Still hasn't it's gotten better, not a lot better. I hear a little chuckle. There's some people that get that. And no paraeducator requests at this point based on our current needs. So this chart shows our students with disabilities, our actual numbers. Hopefully they match up with the numbers I shared earlier. But you can see this is 6 years of data. You have both your October and June collections. So it kind of paints a picture. As you know, the PPS budget typically goes up year after year, and you can kind of see why. You kind of see those numbers going up in tandem. The June numbers are higher just because of our child find obligations. We test students throughout the school year and find them eligible. And then through the graduation of THS and a little less our Elite program, you see those numbers kind of trickle down in October. Interestingly enough, our 24-24 October collection was very similar to our 23-24 number, showing a little bit of a leveling off. I know the needs are still very high in the buildings, but that's just an interesting observation. It's not on this graphic, but I did look at the prevalence rates too, and it's in the budget book, but we're at about 15.4%. Call it 15.5%. The state's at about 18%. We don't actually know what the 24-25 state number is, so we are below the prevalence rate of the state, which we like to be below that number. So that's just something to note. Our non-certified staffing insights. We typically get a lot of questions about the non-certified staffing, which includes our paraeducators, to a lesser extent our health aides, and our speech-language pathology assistants. So just some information as far as the 24-25 budget and kind of how we plan for the 25-26 budget. So for the 24-25 school year, we required 4 less paras when you looked at the end of the 23-24 year going to the 24-25 year. And that was really due to just really thoughtful, effective scheduling and really emphasizing inclusion and having students working together in a classroom as opposed to one-to-one support. And I have a little more information on the next slide. I don't want to spend too much time talking about that. The other thing is requests, right? Because paraeducators, this is a dynamic number. It's not static. So in other words, what you planned for in November when we were setting up the budget is not necessarily what we're going to end up with in May when we finalize the Board of Education budget. And it's not going to be what we require in September or late August, let's say, when students come back to school. It's just impossible because we have move-ins, we have PPT decisions. So it's important to mention that because it's, as you can imagine, it's kind of hard to plan for a solid FTE that goes throughout the school year. So I just wanted to mention that. I will say, though, that in district, for students in district, we have very very few requests for paraeducator support for students in district. What we have noticed is not necessarily an influx, but we have seen a good number of families move into district in which they require paraeducator support. And many times this is one-to-one support, which means that we either reallocate when we can, when it's not a disruption to other students' programs, or we have to hire. So that's why it's very hard to predict. Even though we feel very comfortable with the numbers, just based on how things have operated for the last few years. Oh yeah, there's one other note. So only the PPT can actually recommend paraeducator support. So in other words, it's not an administrative decision. I can't make that decision. My supervisors and coordinator behind me can't make that decision. It's only the PPT that can actually provision that support, except in emergency or safety situations. So I like this table because it kind of paints a picture about where our paraeducators are allocated. So you can see our programs and you can see our schools. And what you'll notice that in the bottom, it kind of compiles the total number. You can see that a good majority of our paraeducators are actually shared paraeducators. So it's efficient. It's about inclusion. It's about least restrictive environment, students with typical peers. ABA, just for clarification, is our applied behavior analysis. Those are our specialized resource program paraeducators. So that number typically is around in the 50s, just because that's the number of slots we have, and we're typically at capacity. We have 54 seats? 56 seats. I did my math wrong. It's getting late. We have 56 seats. We're typically at capacity with that program. And we just added another section a few years ago, mind you, and we're at capacity with that section. So that's just something to keep in mind too. The asterisk, the other aspect that I like to point out is those asterisks are those programs or schools where we had move-ins in which we had to provision additional paraeducator support. That was not planned for. But again, because we had 4 or less because of the efficiencies, when we started it, the actual challenge to the operational budget was minimal. And then for actually, let me take a step back. Our added district placements is another aspect of the PPS budget that, $5.5 million. It's an incredible cost for these placements. They're required under the IDA and state statute, but we also have to kind of keep in mind that this is also something that sometimes is hard to plan for. So, but what you'll see though is that over the last 6 years, as far as this chart, you can see that we've ebbed and flowed in the 40s. We haven't really seen an increase in the number that's been substantial. Again, this is dynamic as well because this is all based on PPT decisions. So it's not anything that's done administratively. So when the only option for a student to receive their free and appropriate public education is at a district, that's when that decision is made. So what is the impact of the added district placements? I know Dr. Samuel spoke a little bit about it. There's a huge impact, and it's affecting every town, every board of education, I believe. I could be being a little bit too assuming, but it's definitely affecting us for sure. One thing that was mentioned was the tuition increases of 7% on average for 24-25. Again, we don't know about these till the spring, so it's kind of hard to plan for an 11% increase because there's no way we would anticipate an 11% increase, especially from our regional education service centers. Also, compounding that is many of our students are requiring more comprehensive placements, residentials, 2-to-1, adult support, nursing services in their placement. These are all incredible costs. So that's just something that has been, challenging and something that we plan for the new budget, but something that sometimes happens during the school year that we have to kind of plan for as well in the midst of the budgetary planning process. Trumbull has seen an increase in the number of students that have moved into district that require an added district placement, even though we did do a little research, and it seems like most families that have their students outplaced have been here for a very long time. But it only takes a few of these students to move into town that can challenge a budget. I can count on less than 2 hands. I don't want to say this exact number of the students that moved into town, but yet it was a $300,000 unforeseen cost to the district just for a few kids. $300,000, that would include transportation. So that's just something else that I don't mean to be all doom and gloom, but I think it's important to know, like, as we're developing the budget, just what we're dealing with throughout the year. And then the enrollment, I'll have some positive stuff a little later, I promise. And then enrollment of students in outplacements, we're projecting 40. Again, it's dynamic. We don't really know. I think we'll be in the 40s for sure, but we don't know the exact number. Right now, it looks like about 40. And again, just like paraeducators, On the continuum of services, we really have to look at out-of-district placements for certain students. It's just something we have to do. It's legally mandated for us to do that when a student cannot be educated in our public school system. Oops. And this is the table that Marty Dr. Semmel was alluding to. As you see here, these are our contracts so these are the numbers from our contracts with Trumbull Public Schools. I can't say like this is for everyone in the state, but for our contracts, these are the increases that we have from 23-24 to 24-25. I know some of these prices are incredible. I understand that. But one thing to keep in mind, one observation is that the top three are CES, ACES. That was an interesting observation because typically year over year, they actually had the least, the lesser of the increases. So when we saw an 11% increase for CES, the preschool and primary learning center, I know the names changed, but I'll go with the old names. ACES Mill Road, we saw a close to 11% increase. This was especially profound for us for this year and something we have to plan for next year because we have about 50%, a little less than 50% of our students are in these RESC programs. So in other words, these increases for those ACES and CES affected us more just because of that aspect. This is why we really advocate for transparency in the tuition setting. A lot of my directors and superintendents are really pushing on the State Department of Education to look at these and how are they setting them, because they almost seem arbitrary at certain times. So, all right, so here's one more positive slide, I believe. So what are we doing to either avoid these high costs or to mitigate through revenue generation? Well, first and foremost, REACH, like stated earlier, REACH, SRP, ELITE, a lot of the training we're doing with our structured literacy, I didn't have that in there, but that's also important. These all allow us to avoid high cost. I would say a conservative estimate, and my team behind me can back me up, we would probably have to outplace between 10 to 15, maybe even more students if we didn't have these programs. And we have to also keep in mind that even if those students weren't outplaced, there's dozens of students that benefit from these programs, just because of the different milieu experiences you get in like ELITE for our transitional program, specialized resource program is for our students on the autism spectrum. REACH is for our students, our secondary students with social emotional challenges. So those alone allow us to avoid those high cost outplacements. Some other initiatives we have been doing or that are new. So we continue to enroll students in our REACH program. This has been a long-term partnership with Monroe. So we continue to take on students for tuition, which will help to offset certain costs. We've been entertaining partnerships with our ELITE program similarly, where we're trying to partner up with the district to have students enroll in our ELITE program for tuition as well. We're making some headway with that, I believe, knock on wood. And like Dr. Semmel said, utilizing our Class V endorsement, this is our ELITE van drivers. They have their V endorsement, which allows them to do the morning and afternoon routes. So we were able to avoid costs of 3 very expensive bus routes by using our paraeducators. I don't know what the final number was. I think it was around $100,000 we were able to avoid this year. And hopefully we could continue to look at that for the next year as well. And again, just advocating for full funding of excess cost reimbursement. When you see, the writing was on the wall. When you see those tuition costs going up, you knew that more districts were tapping into those finite funds. So we knew, the writing was on the wall. We were calling it out in like the summer and even had a meeting to talk about it. We knew that the writing was on the wall that was going to occur, where it was going to be short funded pretty substantially. And that's why we came at the shy of 60% reimbursement. So, continue to advocate for fully funding that, especially for fiscal year 26, where I know I'm very nervous about that. And again, monitoring our approved programs in their tuition setting. We're also excited to look at, I believe it was looking like they were going to, for fiscal year 27, set aside some funds for regional programming. So just like our REACH and hopefully ELITE, we're really looking to utilize any additional funds to build our programs and create a regional network with all of our LEAs, as opposed to looking outside of the district for these very expensive approved programs. It'd be great to have a network of expertise and programming with let's say Fairfield and Monroe, so we can share those programs with each other. So that's something we're looking forward to as well. So that was more positive. So So that's the end of my presentation. I don't have to go. So, and I think I'm going to invite Dr. Semmel back up.
That's very positive.
It was, right?
So I just have a couple more slides, and then we can get into the questions. I think it's always important to kind of do a look back when we think about budgeting. Last year, the Board of Ed, during the budget process, approved a 4.92% increase, but ultimately we received a 4% increase. So how did that actually translate to any changes in the Trumbull Public Schools? Well, the major change, because this was about a $1 million reduction for us last year from our approved Board of Ed budget. I know it's important to use the right language. We definitely got more money going from 23-24 into 24-25. But in order to get to the 4%, we needed to cut about $1 million plus. We had to really work hard with our broker and change insurance plans. So taking 1,200 people or so and moving their insurance carrier is not always a fun thing to do. People don't like changing their insurance. But I got to say, all of our unions were quick to say, if we're going to be looking at a 34% increase in United Healthcare, then I don't want to pay that either. So we were able to move over to the state partnership plan. We're in the first year of that work this year. So we saved about $1 million in that switchover. So that was a big part of the savings. We did have to reduce an attendance paraprofessional at the high school. We brought the Ag Sci director down 0.2. We did eliminate some professional development and teacher training. We made some changes to the technology allocation, but we're still on track with our 5-year plan. I really pushed hard on our insurance broker, and I learned a lot about how much insurance brokers charge people. Now we have a flat fee, and it's a very reasonable fee. And they're still doing very good work for us. So I was able to make some significant reductions there. And we did reduce some of our legal expenses. And of course, there was some smaller cuts that we made as well. One of them was rugby. Pay to play was listed as a cut because we were, again, looking to try to reduce costs for parents. So bringing you back to where I started, we need about 4.87% to stay afloat for what we currently have. Now, if the Board of Ed was going to receive a 4% increase this year, which was the same as we received last year, we would actually need to get rid of all the below the line items. So in order to get to 4%, we'd need to eliminate everything that was below the line. So any of those additional staffing, the world language, the additional bus we were trying to add, all those things would definitely be out. And then we would still need to find $1 million in cuts of current staffing. I would suggest that we use $200,000 of the non-lapsing account. I was a little actually afraid to say that going into this meeting because I wasn't aware that they were going to approve the $40 million for ECR for this year, because we're running a deficit of about $350,000 right now. That ECR money is should right-size our ship for this year, which means instead of using over half of our remaining non-lapsing account, I may not be touching it. But the year is still young, and we're not quite done. We would still need to eliminate, I see I left a typo in it. It's not 10 staff members. I should have said 7 staff members. So we'd need to eliminate 7 staff members, and these are just musings at this point. We would need to delay our technology plan. We might consider increasing our pay-to-play for athletics. We'd have to reduce curriculum writing and professional development, furniture and supplies. Now, if ECR went to 72%, and we could count on 72% for 26, we would save ourselves $140,000 right there. And if insurance went down to 11%, we'd actually save $400,000 right there. These are unknowns at this point as we stand here. So it's very hard for any of us to predict exactly what will happen. But at least have a little bit more hope that they approved the $40 million, although that might make some people spiteful. So I don't know what's going to happen in terms of because the governor certainly wasn't happy about this extra $40 million. Calling it irresponsible spending. So we'll have to see what that does during the budget process. But if we do receive a 3.25% increase, and I've had multiple conversations with Ms. Tesoro throughout the last number of months. Ms. Timpanelli often joins us for those conversations to talk about, supporting our budget. But Ms. Tesoro had shared with me yesterday that we'd be getting in her budget proposal a 3.25% increase. So I put this slide together just to say, well, how would that impact us? And I really haven't had a lot of chance to talk to a lot of other people about this. But I will say that she did a great job explaining kind of her concerns and where the overall just town finances are and that situation. And I know that a lot of this is happening from outside forces like funding from the state, also some tax revenues, things like that. But again, all the below the line items would have to go. We would then need to find $2 million in cuts of current staffing and programs, which is going to hurt. Right? I'm not going to sugarcoat that. That's a lot of money to cut out of current staffing and programs. So again, use $200,000 of the non-lapsing account, maybe delay technology plan by $200,000, but it could mean up to 17 staff members to get there. Because again, if most of our budget is people, then to get to a number like that, it's not going to be pencils and paper clips and things like that. It's going to have to be people. Although we will spend some time scouring to see if there's additional reductions that could be made. We want to try to keep cuts away from the classrooms as much as possible. Again, maybe increasing pay to play, curriculum writing, reduction, maybe not have anybody doing any external professional development, just eliminate that for next year completely and live with the furniture that you've got. No updates to furniture, but we've been trying to replace some student desks and things like that. So at some point they become broken and unusable. So a 3.25% would definitely hurt us. Knowing that 4.87 with those other assumptions I mentioned would mean a $2 million cut and no additional below the line. So we all know that teaching is about people working with kids. And so it's the adults working with kids. And so it's a very person-focused kind of workforce. We believe that our budget focuses on our priorities. We think that we're very efficient with the money that we are given by the Trumbull taxpayers. We know that the students are achieving at high levels, and we'd like to keep doing innovations that help our students achieve to even greater levels. But we also recognize just the other part of the equation. And it's not just all about increasing education budgets. We understand that there's a push and pull, and there's taxpayers on the other end of this that also have to be considered. So we want to work as a team together to try to do what's right for the schools and the taxpayers of Trumbull, and definitely appreciate your attention. And we're excited to listen to your questions and get into some conversation. All right. Thank you.
Phew, thank you. All right, let's try to do this somewhat organized. I'm going to start with Board of Finance. I'm going to ask for your questions, and we'll also then move to Town Council Finance Committee members, so that we'll just kind of go in order. Marty, did you want to start?
First, that was a terrific presentation. Really appreciate the detail, and thank you for bringing us through that. Just one comment before we get going on that one number that struck me when you were talking about the change in people that need free or reduced lunch. I think that's the same noise or concerns we hear on our side of so many people concerned about increased taxes. And so I was surprised to see that number. That's a huge jump, but it also helps explain why so many people are in a challenged time right now. I have a handful of questions. If I could start with the special ed, I wanted to understand a little bit more. Can you describe a little bit more? I don't understand on all the out-of-district stuff we're doing. Is it, and you've done a lot to mitigate it in some of these programs. What I guess I'm not understanding is the programs that we're spending so much money on to send people out. Is it possible for Trumbull to buy this in some way, so to avoid that cost, even though in 1 year maybe we're losing money? But I guess I'm not understanding how we're spending so much money sending people out and year after year after year, and why it's not a better decision for us to buy whatever is required that we're sending them out for. Why can't that be done here or regionally, as you're saying? So maybe you could spend a moment on that.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, we constantly talk about either improving our programs or building programs. It's really about the cohorts of students, like whether or not it makes sense. Like it depends on how many students, because all the students that are outplaced for different reasons. We have students that have more medical needs, right? We have students that have more of a social, emotional, behavioral aspect to their programming. We have students that are on the autism spectrum that perhaps the specialized resource program wasn't appropriate, or perhaps are in the secondary level where we kind of faded out that type of instruction. So realistically, we constantly think about expanding our programs. So, we've talked about expanding our REACH program to focus more on the middle school because we noticed that's a need, which we're working on right now. We're also looking at SRP, our specialized resource program, and figuring out if there's ways of making that more efficient. So, but as far as we always talk about our students that are outplaced, and also the other conversation we have is when are they ready to come back? What we're finding is that the students that were outplaced are so impacted by their disability, it's very hard to bring them back. We're talking about students that need 2-to-1 support. So if we were going to do 2-to-1 support in district, and we really look at the return on investment of actually building the program, sometimes it's not there. Not to kind of have a broad lens, because realistically, we really look at what the costs are. We look at the staffing. We look at how much a student costs to be outplaced. And right now, I think that we're at a point where we're just trying to figure out how to make our programs more efficient. Making REACH more efficient, making our SRP programs more efficient, and then we're kind of looking to perhaps develop more programs. It's kind of iterative, right? We can't just build all these programs. Building programs are really expensive too. If you look at SRP, to open up that classroom was over $300. I mean, it was more than anticipated because we actually needed more paraeducators. We needed a little bit more speech support, administrative support. So, but it is something we constantly look at. I don't mean to be philosophical, but it's a great question, and we do look at it.
All right. No, thank you. I'm just trying to understand it a little better.
Yeah.
With regard to the teacher turnover rate, did I hear you say that there was 750,000 that you think you're going to get to this year, and you're budgeting a little lower than that next year?
We had put, for the 24-25 budget, we had put in 750 for this year's budget, 24-25. But we're only achieving about 665. So when we were noticing our trending was more like 665, because we had been increasing that staff turnover number, we may have overshot a little bit. So we're gonna scale that back a little bit.
Is there? I understood that, and I don't know if the law passed yet. Did the Social Security law pass where teachers can now get their Social Security too? Is that in place? Yeah. And so has there been any change to retirement given that you can now collect that piece that was not accessible before? Or I don't know when that happened, and have you seen behavior change off that yet?
Yeah, it just happened. I haven't seen behavior change, but I did wonder if there would be people, especially of retirement age now, because for some people, like my whole career, I've been essentially an educator, right? So I don't even know that I have the quarters for Social Security. So for someone like me, it really wouldn't matter. But there are probably people who are, a decade ahead of me that it might. But I don't know, Mr. Chell, if we've seen any, we know our numbers of retirements right now.
Yeah, we're actually trending a little bit down. We're at 9. We're averaging around 12 the past couple of years. So I thought we'd see a little jump there as well, and we haven't. But we're going to, anything can happen. We could get 2 tomorrow, So we're hoping we're going to get up to that number 12 because that will help with the turnover piece.
Have we entered, can I keep going for a few? Have we entertained buyout offers recently? As I recall, our average teacher salary is significantly higher. Not that our contracts are significantly different, but our base is older than many other districts. And I'm wondering, between the Social Security and maybe providing some sort of buyout offer, maybe that would enable you to convert the base to a lower average cost. When's the last time we've done a buyout, and has that been under consideration?
Yeah, since I've been here, there hasn't been a buyout. I don't know if there was a buyout. Not that you can remember. Not a long history. We could. It's something that you can look at. Yeah, certainly you do need some of that capital to cover that. But I do understand that the lower salaries would cover, would cover that. Plus would be the argument. At the same time, keep in mind that one of the reasons that I think we do so well in Trumbull is because we do have a very experienced group of teachers, and
Yes.
they know what they're doing. And I don't want to see them all leave, quite frankly.
They're amazing, and your results have been fantastic. I agree with that.
Plus, I'll just add it. I do believe that the pool of teachers available right now has gotten smaller, so I'd be a little hesitant to get rid of or encourage teachers to retire for that reason too. I'd almost rather that they hang on a little bit.
Okay, and then one of my last questions, with regard to busing, I know I'm not going to bring up start times. I know I'm not going to go down that path. But the thing that was interesting to me of start times when the analysis was done previously was this idea of looking at a third tier of busing as opposed to just the 2 tiers. Just conceptually, if you're renting a bus for the day and now you can use it on 3 tiers instead of 2 tiers, you're going to save a significant amount of money. You have to pay the drivers longer, they have longer hours, but the big cost is on the buses themselves. And when the outside consultant had evaluated that, it seemed there was really significant savings there. And in a year such as this, where we're challenged, and there's potentially upwards of $600,000 to $1 million on moving from a 2-tier schedule to a 3-tier schedule, I was wondering, has that been under consideration and where we are in terms of evaluating that?
No, we haven't. That's kind of like a backdoor way to late school start, but no, we haven't. We explored that. We do know that there's some savings on that, but the board had looked at that in the past, and currently we're not interested in moving to that.
I guess the thing that I don't understand about that is, and obviously the board gets to make the decisions on that, I get it, but if there's potentially $600,000 to $1 million of savings, and we're talking about 17 teachers potentially, or whatever it might be, I don't understand why things like that would not be on the table. So it's your decision, clearly. I guess I just don't understand that. I'll stop here. I'll let others have a chance to ask their questions. But thank you for the presentation tonight.
Yep. I would just opine that I would hope that the Board of Finance wouldn't reduce us by the $1 million to force us into a situation where we do have to move to, consider things like that. So I would hope that this is all based off of the finances of the town and not of a philosophy of late school start.
Just to be clear, you're right. I do feel strongly about late school start. I think it's going to hopefully happen at the state level at some point in time. I understand there's a lot that goes into that, and it's challenged, and a lot of people in this room are not for that. I hear that. I think it's a mistake. But the money savings is real. And whether that ultimately moves into later school start time, I would hope it would, but the money savings is the issue. And you're right, we have a lot of things to balance. I haven't had a chance to go through this big blue book yet. And, I don't like the idea of losing teachers like that either. So I think we're all going to hustle and figure out what we can do. I just don't, it doesn't make sense to me that if there's of all the things I can look at and say, where is the big money? What could we possibly do? In earlier years when I first came on, the schools were updating a lot of the electrical systems and utilities, and there was savings every single year, and it would save the day every time, because we moved from inefficient systems to efficient systems, and there's all this money, and that's all done. Like, there's no other big places to find the missing money, if you will. And this is one big area that should be explored, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Okay, Scott Zemoff is on Zoom, and I was told that if I just call on Scott, it will magically happen. Right, Bill? Hold, please. Scott? Yeah, I know. Can you unmute there, Scott?
Thanks, Ed.
Oh, there you are.
I hit unmute and it kept just telling me you are muted. I got it. Thank you. So Thank you for letting me ask a few questions. I'll try to be quick. My first one is about the outplacement students. And in all honesty, we may not have the answer, but for the students who move to town and need outplacement, it's a two-part question. Is do we know if they have siblings? And are we the initial ones doing the review? My purpose of the question, just so you know where I'm coming from, is Trumbull has high taxes. Why would you move here to have your students sent to another school unless we're doing something differently than our neighboring towns or cities?
Yeah, I can't really speak to if they have siblings, nor would I share that just because the number is so small that I might be sharing confidential information. You know, you got to be very, very sensitive. No, I understand your question though. So, but you know, I wouldn't really, honestly, I wouldn't even know how to answer that without kind of.
No problem.
You know,
Then I
sharing.
guess just to the second part of it.
Yeah.
Are we doing the initial IEP review here in town, or are they coming to us with it?
They come to, well, typically they come to us with it. So it doesn't matter where you move in the United States, as long as you have a valid IEP, we have to utilize that to provide comparable services, I believe is the appropriate language. And then we typically review that IEP within 30 days. So
Again,
that
all fair, and I wouldn't suggest that we didn't keep it right, but it's, again, Trumbull is not a cheap place to live. I love living here, but why would you move to this town to have your child sent out for schooling unless we aren't doing something similar other school districts are? I'll leave it be there.
Yeah.
So my
Noted.
next question, where did we come up with the $80,000 per staff in one of your last slides, Dr. Summer?
So you used to use the
Yeah,
$55,000 number as an MA5.
Yep. It's we've been looking at our numbers, and we've been using 80,000 for the last couple of years. That's something that Mr. Hendrickson and Mr. Cello looked at as well. So that's what we use as the average teacher.
Is that salary, or are we also including all their benefits with it?
It's salary and some of the benefits, because depending on what tier they take of benefits, it changes. So it's an amalgamation of that.
Okay, well, the reason I ask is because it seems fair that number should be adjusted if we're going to use it for an evaluation, because we talk about how much costs have gone up. We're talking about 13% increase in health insurance, but we aren't adjusting the cost that you would then be impacted.
Scott, would it be helpful if we ask for an updated list of, by contract, like the steps and what base salaries are? So like the chart that had like MA5, entry-level teachers, and the steps that they,
Well,
by
either way, all I'm saying is it said on that page to get to the number of that the first selectman has suggested, we may, and then I'm saying that, have to eliminate 17 positions at $80,000 each. But if that's the same number we've been using forever, but health insurance keeps going up and this covers part of their benefits, that number should adjust with it. So therefore it should bring down the number of people that need to be eliminated.
yeah, I agree. I understand your question. I think it would be helpful for us to understand if your staff, the turnover, if you're reducing staff, where that falls. They're giving you an idea by average, I think is what we're looking at in these numbers. Just an idea of where they are. I don't think you would know until you got to when you were talking about positions.
Laney, Mr. Chell and I will review that, both salary
Thank you.
and benefits.
I appreciate it. And I'll try to make the next few pretty quick. First of all, I'm a big fan of having languages down in the elementary school, but my question is to the world language Spanish teacher in 5th grade, obviously. That would be shared, it'd be limited amount. We talk about neighboring towns having them, being that we bring in the idea of neighboring towns and we're trying to compete. What has that actually done for the neighboring towns aside from having it in 5th grade? Is there any increase in their Spanish learners? Is there any increase in their test scores, especially when these same learners get to high school? Do you have any data on that to support that just because neighboring towns do it, we should?
I can share that when Trumbull had a Spanish program at the elementary level, the middle school teachers shared that they did come to the middle school with stronger skills, and the curriculum had to be adjusted because of it. So that is one impact. So they were able to go to a higher level of complexity with it starting in the elementary school. There's also a lot of great research around speaking more than one language in elementary school, being able to use a higher percentage of your brain in dual language programs and things like that. So we know that from a global perspective, it would be a good idea to introduce those types of things as early as possible when we have the resources to do so.
I don't disagree. Again, it was just comparatively because we're talking about the other towns, and I believe that we should have another language. It should be further down than 5th grade. But if we can't, is the benefit actually substantial to, when we're talking about a tight budget, to have the additional cost? All right, I'll move on to my next question. Within your packet, it wasn't on the slides, but it talked about a supervisory custodian. And my question is, it says that your custodial supply costs have gone up, but we've been talking for the last number of years that the cost of all these supplies have gone up. So have they gone up based on units gone up, or is it actually the cost which would have been falling in the same line?
So Kevin Dion, the Director of Operations here. Both, actually. So we see an increase in just the cost of the supplies. I mean, you saw the COVID increases, you've seen the inflational increases. Really is a full-time job to make sure you're going out with all your other vendors and securing the best price possible. And there's also a use increase. We do see more needs out there for our tissues as well as our paper products and our plastic products. Our buildings are being used a lot more. Since COVID, we've seen a lot of after-school activities. We're seeing weekend use, so you'll see increases then as well.
Okay, so I guess you kind of went where I expected it to go. The costs have all increased. The usage has increased based on the changes in our habits. So how will we be offsetting the cost of a supervisor with the decrease in those things when those things won't change, right? Unless we're outfitting significantly and holding away tissues, I don't know how the cost can cover $116,000.
It's not about withholding supplies, nor is it about reducing the quality of the supplies. What it is about going out there to multiple vendors, having the time, as we know with purchasing, the town itself has a purchasing agent, constantly striving to get the best pricing, going out for RFPs, and doing that with the vendors and going off state contracts, but looking at what our usage is, constantly talking to vendors about modernization and equipment increases so that we can actually offset some of those costs. So it's a full-time job. Most of the job would be managing the staff as well as managing the inventory and the costs.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Lainey. That's my list for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Anybody else questions? Paul?
Yes, Marty, I would echo Marty's comments about your presentation. Very well done, clear, meaningful, and interesting, and positive, by the way. Thank you. I think I have a couple of what I think are very simple questions. Your potential recommendations that would occur or would be recommended resulting from a 4% decrease or a 3.5% decrease, whatever the numbers are those recommendations that you've outlined at this point, recommendations coming from you and your internal staff or coming from you and the board?
This would be mostly me and central office staff having some conversations right now. We try not to get too into the weeds about what we're going to cut at this stage because there's a lot of moving parts. We try to give a sense of what kinds of things we'd have to be looking at in order to get to that cut. So typically when we talk about reductions, we get involved with the building leaders as well. And we talk to the Board of Ed members and have those conversations as well. So this is really mostly about me and a smaller group of people at this point.
As a follow-up to that, can you clarify in the recommendation that you've provided if a 3.25 reduction were to occur? Can you clarify the distinctions between bullet number 1, 2, and 5, all of which relate to staffing reductions, but I'm not quite sure the distinctions between them as to where those dollars would come from?
Is he looking at this page? So you mean like all below the line, that being bullet 1?
Yeah, you say all below the line additional staffing, and then in number 2, it's cuts in current staffing, and in number 5, it's eliminate 17 staff members. They
Well,
all
maybe,
relate-
yeah, okay.
They all relate to staffing actions, but I'm not quite sure what the end result would be.
Maybe I could have made the slide a bit more clear. So the first bullet is basically just saying we would have to get rid of everything below the line. When we talk about below the line, it's anything we're trying to add to the budget. So we're saying forget about those reading specialists at the middle school. Forget about all those new positions, Spanish, all gone. Then the next one is just saying we'd have to find $2 million more in cuts. That's just more of a general statement. And then the bullet below that starts talking about how we can potentially achieve that $2 million. So bullet 2 maybe should have been, or the bullets after could have been maybe indented slightly to make that a little bit more clear.
Yep.
Also, in clarification, Phyllis sent out the presentation, the slides that had the actual breakdown of what that below the line staffing looked like from their presentations at their meetings. So if anybody wants to do that, I do have one printed copy, but you all have those presentations. So if there's any questions, we can make sure those get sent out again.
Thank you.
All right, so just for clarification, it would be nothing new and $2 million of cuts. Okay.
My last question relates to your enrollment projection.
Yep.
Last year's enrollment, as opposed to what you're projecting for this coming new fiscal year, the reduction is about 100. Can you provide us at this point with any data, or can you gather for us the data that relates to how many students have come to us from the various multi-unit residential housing developments that have been approved and developed over the last 2 to 10 years?
Yep.
You can have those numbers?
I don't have them on with me right
Can
now.
you provide them to us at some time?
Yeah, so just I want to make sure I provide what you're looking for. How many of our current students come from one of the housing developments? Or does
Over
it
the last number of years.
for the last number
For
of years?
however many years you might have that data.
Right. Okay, so so maybe there was 10 4 years ago, and now it's 20 3 years ago. That kind of
You're
data.
projecting it be
Right.
32 next year.
Yeah, I have to say I had looked at this, and I don't remember the numbers. I looked at this about a year plus ago, and I was expecting to see a large number because there was a lot of talk about it.
Right.
And I was surprised that it wasn't as many as I was expecting. So that was I just know that that's a reaction I had, that I was expecting to see more given all the talk. But I will.
I felt the same way, and the numbers are surprising.
Yeah. So let me actually go back and see what we can get for you.
Great, thank you.
Paul, I do believe that a lot when you guys looked at it the last time, that a lot of them were students who were already in district who had moved or were other, split families, that they were now residents in some of the developments. So it was the same student
from the
moving
district to
to
another
it. Yes.
district within the same town. Got it.
I don't like these new mics. Any other questions? Anything? Go ahead, Christine.
Hi there. Thanks so much for an excellent presentation. My question is a little bit not quite something that is within today's presentation or packet, but I remember seeing something about a grant funding for, and perhaps that's the wrong word, but some funding that had come in for mental health new assessments, that was like a pilot program at Hillcrest. And I was just curious, maybe for any of those kind of newer things that have gotten added, do we think that some of how those might have gotten funded may be at risk in the future, and then those things might end up disappearing because it would have to be added if you were trying to replicate those and continue on those?
I was trying to remember the name. I remember it was like, what was
Yeah,
that
I
name?
apologize for not knowing the name.
Dessa's
but-
the name of what you're referring to.
Okay. Yeah. So we piloted the DESA at Hillcrest, Middlebrook, Frenchtown, and Reach. So that was last year, and then this year what we did was we slowed the process a little bit, and we actually did a whole reflection on it because we wanted to make sure that not only did we have a screener, but we also wanted to make sure that we had the right tiered instruction at Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. So we're kind of going through that right now. Actually, my mental health supervisor over there, Ms. Murphy, I want to show him, wave to her. I'm not going to put her on the spot, though, I promise. So as far as the I believe there's a public act that states that the state has to assist us with a mental health screener. I don't know if that's what you're speaking of, but I don't believe that public act has changed. So, and what the state of Connecticut has chosen is the DESA, which I forgot what the Devereaux Student Strengths Assessment. That's actually the term for it. So we can always re-engage in the pilot, but right now we're just trying to figure things out, and we've done a lot of work kind of doing, looking at how the buildings implemented it, what they thought about it, getting feedback from staff, and then we're going to re-entertain it for next year. So, but that's still there though. I believe it's a public act that states that the State Department of Education has to assist us with that screener.
So the screener is just the actual program, the questions that you ask.
Yeah, it's like
but they
8
didn't give you any
questions.
help with that. They didn't like provide a person to do that, or
They did actually. No, they actually did provide technical assistance through the actual company. I forget the not Panorama. What's the other company? Jeez, they did provide technical assistance. So then, in other words, they helped us to set up the schools in the system. They showed us how to use the feedback tools. So yeah, it was actually a really good tool. We just want to make sure that we do things methodically and we do things with intent, and that's why we kind of slowed it down a little bit.
Okay.
But yeah.
Was that tool used for some PPTs for some kids or 504 plans or not?
No,
Anything like that?
we piloted it. We did disaggregate, because you could disaggregate by students, IEP, 504. So that was kind of useful. What it really showed us, and I might be getting too much in the weeds, it really did show us that our schools do a really good job of intervening with students, because a lot of the students that were flagged typically had special education, a 504, they were in some sort of intervention service. So that was actually reassuring. That really showed that the tool worked, and 2, that we were actually taking action when students were at risk for those types of challenges.
Nikki, I'm going to move over to Town Council Finance Committee.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I just want to piggyback off Marty a little bit on the private special ed programs. So when I'm looking at the list of 13 locations here, like ACES Mill Road, so do we assume that there are multiple kids going to each one of these locations, or could be one child to one of these locations?
It could be. Yeah,
It could be. It could be one child.
One to how many? What's the range?
Um,
What'd you say?
it typically, I wouldn't know the exact number, but we don't have more than a handful in any one placement.
Okay.
They're very, when you place a kid, it's really about the student's needs. It's not necessarily about price or like how far it is away. So typically when we go through that process, they end up kind of dispersed all over. But typically we don't have more than a handful. We have most at CES, but CES has several programs. So it's...
And it looks like CS has different locations as well, is that right?
They
PLC would be a different
Yep.
location than TDP.
Yeah, they have
Yeah.
2 locations that we
Okay.
typically send students to.
And so when if there are multiple children at one location, are they all there for the same needs typically? The same type of support?
Typically, we play. So again, I'm trying to. So yes and no, because every student's IEP is very specific, especially when
Right.
when a student is being outplaced. Typically, their IEPs are pretty intensive. So, but a lot of times, what we try to do is match their needs with the staffing. What the experiences in that program. We would call it milieu sometimes. What's their approach as a team? And it's so we do sort of place based on that, but it's really just about what the students' needs are.
Okay. And last question.
Yep.
So your team is actually the team that chooses that match, is that right? Or is the parent involved in selecting that match?
Oh yes,
How does
yes.
that work?
Yes. The parent. So the parent has many rights under the IDA and state statutes. So they have a huge say in where the student is. Even though, interestingly enough, we are responsible for it, but the parents has many safeguards as far as where we place the student. So we really try to be collaborative, and 99% of the time we are. But sometimes we're not, and there is a process for that. It rarely gets to that, but it does. So yeah, but parents definitely have a say, and it's really the school-based PPTs that make that decision. I'm typically not part of many of those teams, but sometimes I am. But it's typically the administrator and their school-based team and the family.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that working?
Yep.
Okay.
Just a couple of questions. Before the referendum on Hillcrest, there was a presentation that showed, at least at the elementary level, that there were a couple of schools that were going to, over a period of time, have some projected growth. If I remember correctly, it was Booth Hill and Jane Ryan, both schools that were projecting growth over, I think it was a 3-year period. I don't have the numbers in front of me. When I look at the rollover, the projections included in the slide, I don't see those numbers. So the question would be for the future, can we have a projection of growth at these schools over or at least a 2-year period, just so we can understand what the impact is as they get into the pipeline of our education system?
Yeah, we can try to do that. We usually do have a demographic section in the budget book itself. I'm trying to remember if there's NESDEC projections in here. I think there
are.
I think there are some.
I don't have the budget book in front of me. I'm just.
Yeah, I think there might be some in there. So if you could take a look just to see if that fills what you're asking for, it does. They do have projections that they do each year based on things like birth rates, and so they're projected there. You can do a very costly study and have a demographer come in and do that. Part of the master plan did pay a demographer, and so part of that master plan work has his demography work in there. But we use NESDEC does a cheaper version each year for us, and we put that into the budget book. So take a look at that, and if you want additional information beyond that, we can do that because it does do multi-years.
Okay.
It does.
My second question is around transportation. I see the percentage increase is high.
Yeah.
Is there anything within the contract that we have with our vendors that allow us to make some changes? As an example, my children go to middle school. The buses are out there idling. Is there any changes in timing, amount of time that the buses can wait, the idle time, to help sort of reduce or bring down some of that cost?
I'm not the expert in that contract, but I can say we talked last year about how the fact that some of the buses were going longer than 5 hours. I don't remember if anybody remembers that conversation. We worked really hard. I know Mr. Dion worked quite extensively with our transportation director, Dina Robichai, and Paul Hendrickson is often looking at the bills. And I keep saying, we don't have any over 5 hours, right? And at this point, we don't. So that's the minimum. It's 5 hours. So we can't get below that. So there's no additional changes, but we were trying to make sure we didn't have the extra charges that we were getting last year. So yeah, we did look at a number of the bus stops. We tried to make efficiencies, and we are on top of the bus company, and they've been good partners with us. Not everything's perfect, but they've been pretty good partners with us this year.
Anne?
Tony. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you for the presentation. I just have a quick question about the outplacement individuals. Sorry, because obviously it's such a great expense. What's the, I don't know if you can answer this, but what's the age range of the students that are outplaced? So do we have like a 5-year-old outplaced, and do we have a 20-year-old outplaced? And because that 5-year-old, that's a long time expense.
I don't think that's something that you can answer in this format.
Yeah, it's just
because of HIPAA laws.
Right,
But
HIPAA, FERPA, and every other acronym.
Yeah.
I couldn't even pay my daughter's tuition without a special code. So
Yeah. I will say that regardless of a student's age, IDA protects students age 3 through 21.
That's what I mean.
So I'll give the very
3 through
vanilla.
21, yeah, 3 through
PC
21.
question.
I thought it was 22 now. Is it 22?
Oh yeah, it is 22.
Okay.
Some states it's 27. It's just you
right.
know.
That's
22 for now. Knock on wood. You know.
yeah.
I just want to acknowledge that the discussion about outplacement is we're talking about approximately 40 students in a district of 7,000.
It's 4%, which is exactly
Yeah.
what the prevalence in the state is. So we're right around there.
But I also want to acknowledge that the challenges that these families face and that this is not a discussion that anybody has lightly, moving your child out of district. I don't believe that anybody seeks that just because. So, as we're having this discussion, I just really want to acknowledge that this is really important for a lot of people. And I know that we spend a lot of time discussing this in ways that sound like we don't think they deserve it, but it's not about that. It's just trying to find ways to manage this and to acknowledge the fact that these are families that are facing very significant challenges in both their home and when their children are being educated. So I just wanted to take that moment to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
Mr. Cinto, hello.
Yes. What is the total cost of transportation for special education, and and for the education part, both for the 40 students? The total cost?
Just for the outplaced students, Tony?
No, for both.
Okay, because there's also in-district special ed
Yeah, I want
busing as well.
both.
Okay. If you don't have those numbers handy right now, would you provide them for us in follow-up, and I'll make sure everybody gets those numbers.
Dean, what page in the book is it? All the special education costs are right in the right?
Transportation, yeah.
Oh, just transportation, Tony? No, he wants both.
Transportation's $4 million.
Yeah. Say,
Transportation's about $4 million times 100,000 is $4 million.
well, yes, if the math worked out, like I had said, usually when he comes to me with another person, it does cost about 100,000, but you can see in here, like on our presentation, special ed in district transportation is slated to be 1.895 for 25-26, and the sped out of district is 1.120. And then you have the special education summer runs that you have to talk about. So you've got 3.3 million, and then you've got the monitors that cost 460. So 3.3 plus the 4, so you're at about $3.8 million for special education transportation.
I do know that you guys have looked at sharing rides with other districts. You've looked at cost efficiencies for that.
Yeah.
Do you have any data on how successful you've been with that? You joked about hiring our own buses. I actually said that during your presentation at the Board of Ed level, that I thought it'd be funny if we just said, well, we'll buy a bus and we'll do the athletic transportation. Dave and I were going to get our CDL licenses, and we wanted a special paint scheme on the bus. But like those are like not like out of the realm of how do you save like $1 here or there. So if you have any data on what you've been able to save, if you could include that with the information for Mr. Cinto, it would be great.
Lainey, we've also been looking to either purchase used or new buses that are specially configured for special ed students. And I've contacted 5 different vendors, and we're currently in the evaluation phase whether it is worthwhile for Trumbull to make that purchase.
Right, because we do actually have, Mr. Catalano mentioned it, we do actually have 5 of our paras with V licenses. It's a special license that allows you to pick up a child at home and bring them to school, and it's a smaller vehicle, so it's not the large bus. So we actually have 3 routes that are being driven by our paras and picking up our kids and bringing them.
And how does that work with liability and stuff to the district?
Yeah, we work through all that. That's part of our insurance. And they've got the license that they need to do that. They were trained. The V license, it takes some effort to get that V license. So it's saving us about $100,000 this year.
Okay.
And when you think about it, one transportation vehicle like that might cost between $75,000 and $85,000. So if you can use one to start saving, $100,000 here, you can see where but then I don't want to become a transportation company because I don't want to have 50 drivers and 50. I don't want that because now I need a whole system around that where there's definitely there's an asymptotic piece there where it's
Yeah, the threshold of benefit.
it's beneficial, and then at some point it becomes overly cumbersome.
Yeah, I know that that's one of the things that I've talked about with some of our legislators is, how did they set the prices for these things and who decides what the reasonable cost is? If you go to the doctor now, the insurance company tells you what they're allowed to charge and stuff, but there's no oversight on some of these things. So the cost is exponentially increasing and outrageous, but who's to say that's really what it should cost? So I know that they're working on that as well.
Lainey, also there was a question, are there multiple children going to the same facility? And if certain of those children need wheelchairs, so some vehicles that Durham has only accommodates 2 wheelchairs. If we have more than 2 wheelchairs, we have to engage another bus at $100,000. That's why we're going out and looking at perhaps purchasing a bus that has multiple wheelchair stations that could potentially mitigate that cost.
You would think that Durham would want to have a bus that could facilitate that. Mr. Cinto.
Also, on the buses, in the contract, is the GPS separate charge per bus? Or is that all encompassed in the same contract?
No, it isn't a separate
In the system
charge.
that monitors it, do you
It
guys
is
have
a
access to that?
It is not a separate charge.
No, but do you guys have access to that system?
Yes, it's called Zonar.
Okay, and they pay, that's all part of the same contract?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and when you get a chance, just get the number for the next meeting for what I asked earlier.
It isn't a separate
Thanks.
charge.
No, I'm talking
No,
about
the
special ed number.
Oh.
Thanks.
I apologize, Mary.
Thought you were off easy. I just have a couple quickies, actually. On Fairchild, do we know how many students are bused there, since we're on the busing route tonight? And if you don't have it, just at some point, I'm just curious. I thought we had about 50 students going. I just wasn't sure how many are on that bus. And then, Paul, yes, back to you. I should know, what is in the miscellaneous salary items? That was page 1 of the book. There was like a $430,000 increase. I just don't remember what's in that item. Miscellaneous salary
I believe
items.
that's the reserve for negotiations.
Oh, that is reserve, okay.
Yeah. We have 3 contracts currently under negotiations. The secretaries, the custodian maintenance, and also the paraprofessionals. And we're in the midst of negotiations, and that's kind of a placeholder. We don't want to signal what the potential increase could be.
When are those supposed to settle? Or hope to settle? I know how through it goes.
I can deflect that to Mr. Cello, but I
That's okay. I just didn't know.
I don't know. We're closer with the secretaries, just because there are fewer of them.
Okay.
But hopefully within the
It's
next
just a lot larger
couple.
chunk than typically. So
Yes.
Just curious.
Yeah, well,
I know you're settling multiple, so.
you cover probably 300 people or more in those contracts.
Yeah, optimistically, within the next 2 months, they'll be settled.
Okay, perfect. And then I know for workbooks, we have obviously the science of reading is a big shot there. What grades is that elementary school only for that program? Yes, and then is this one shot only and we're done with purchasing? Does this include curriculum or just the workbook, tech books themselves?
That cost includes the curriculum, the workbooks, and the first years of professional development. We've already updated some of the curriculum, and it'll be some further revisions as well. But then there is a recurring cost that is annual in addition to the first year's costs, and it is much significantly less after that first year.
Okay, thank you. And then the excess cost this is for Paul, of course, always. I know that the lunch fund increased, and from last year as part of that, it just seems like not everything is included in that. So I'm just curious if that goes somewhere else. We have the athletic fund, and
You're talking about the allocation?
yeah.
That is based on square footage of the cafeteria area compared to with the square footage of the whole school.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's percentage is used to
The rent.
salaries for custodial and maintenance, supplies, and assorted.
So last year we were, and I can't read like 85,000. Now we're up
Yes,
to 101.
it's 101,000.
So there's the 300 athletic, the E-rate for 100, the magnet school, and now this increasing to 100. It seems like we should have a little bit more in that. I just didn't know if it was being funneled somewhere else. And you can look later. I'm just, putting it on the radar, just curious.
Now, I've got the sheet in front of me.
Okay.
Custodial wages, custodial overtime, custodial trash and recycling, custodial cleaning, custodial repairs, electricity, water and natural gas, custodial supplies, maintenance salaries, maintenance overtime, maintenance repairs, maintenance other purchase services, maintenance supplies, and maintenance equipment.
Yeah, I was just talking about the surplus itself, sorry. The total amount of those together. To me, it looks like it should be 567,000, not the 466, just 100 difference. So, just was asking.
I think we should combine the athletics.
At some point, we go back, maybe at one of the finance meetings. And then, I'm sorry, last one, the position for special ed. And I thought it was a position, I was gonna ask where that was, and then it sounded like for the description that it was also either administrative a little bit, or paperwork, or catching up with that. What is the description of that, and where is it going? And I shouldn't say it.
Oh, the
Where-
additional special
That-
education teacher?
Yes.
Yeah, so we actually don't necessarily know where it's going to go. We do know that globally we're running high as far as our caseloads. So, and it's so basically what we're looking at is, because I don't want to say something on the record.
No, that's fine. I didn't know if I just missed that it was slated for a school,
Yeah.
or if it's need-based.
Yeah, because I was
and-
going to say I got a bunch of administrators back there probably chomp at the bit to be like, that's mine. So right now we just know we're running high. We're still playing catch up, even though we're plateauing. But you saw those numbers go up. So year over year, we haven't necessarily added staff each year. We added a bunch of three elementary teachers a few years ago, though. So we're just really looking globally, and then we'll figure that out later on.
To clarify that a little bit, so when I think about a teacher, I always think about a teacher in a classroom. When you're talking about a special ed position like that, how do you determine what the caseload is? I know it's like you have so many kids on program that require intervention, but how do you deploy the staff by FTE?
Well, we typically try to. I mean, I got my principals over here, but I like grade level to have one teacher focus on grade levels, as long as the caseloads work out that way, though. If that makes sense.
So about how many are on a caseload per special ed teacher for a full-time
right now, it depends on the
equivalent?
building, but I would say we're running well over 20 students per teacher right now, which is getting high, especially with what their conditions have changed as far as what they have to do. So
And is that for pull-out intervention? Is it for push into the
it
classroom?
could be both. Yeah, traditionally it's a lot of pull out, discrete instruction outside of the classroom, but we do have some teachers that do push in.
And is that all based on the IEP?
Yes, it's all based on the IEP.
Okay.
Exactly.
How does that work with other level, the other tiered level intervention? You utilize the same staff for those interventions as well?
Not necessarily. We typically they have specialists in their buildings that will do reading and math intervention.
Okay. So
We
that's
usually
different.
reserve. Yeah, we usually reserve except in a very extenuating circumstance. We rarely use special education for tiered intervention, just as specially designed instruction as per the IEPs of the students.
Okay.
Okay, Mary, to answer your question, on page 4-36 of the budget, and that is budget detail by object, you have dues, fees, and memberships total of $376,000, and then add 14,000 to that, you get the 574,376. The 14,000 is for bad debt expense. That's if for negative balances in the school lunch account. And then the other object of 466,300 is the 300 for athletics revenue, the 100 for E-rate, and 66,300 for magnet school transportation. In the below the line, there is the 101,555 for the food service allocation. In Dr. Semmel's presentation, that takes the budget down to 4.87. That 101,555 is left in the budget, as is the reduction of the elementary school section for 80,000, and also the facilities custodial manager of 116,579, and that's a net of a negative 64,000.
Yeah, that's why I was confused. I'm sorry. That's why I was confused with the 101. So that's
Sure.
off. Isn't it nice you understand all my meandering?
We have a relationship going back years.
Been built. Set, thank you.
Mary's all set. Marty?
Sorry, I forgot two quick ones. Can I have, if you look at I think they're called the 205 account, the revenue accounts you bring in outside the core budget, if you look year over year and the net balances of that, can you just share that? I don't need it now, but I'm like, did it change significantly year over year? Or is it roughly the same?
We can give you
If you could share that.
last couple of years, and yeah, that's no problem.
That'd be helpful. And then
Okay.
finally, I forgot to ask about AI. Is there somebody that is focused on AI in the district, trying to understand how to ultimately leverage our resources more? And maybe you could just give a very brief update on that. I'm just curious what's happening.
Yeah, we brought her with her.
That's good.
With us.
Thank you.
Good evening. Christina Heffley, Director of Digital Learning for the district. So we started 2 summers ago. I'll give you the really short version. We put together an AI cohort of teachers to begin and work over the summer when this AI thing was just sort of starting. And we did our own sort of research. We tested a bunch of different things. We had a lot of conversations about the ethics of it, where it makes sense, where it doesn't. And that group has been meeting now for 2 years. I actually have a group of teachers, the pilot cohort teachers, who are actually testing 2 tools right now with kids in their classrooms. And when we talk about AI in education, we're not talking about the commercial ChatGPT, right? There are a lot of educational technology software companies. We were actually evaluating 3 in a pilot. Conmigo, if you're familiar with Khan Academy, it's their version of it. School AI and Magic School AI. So we have about 12 teachers right now that are part of the AI cohort who are sort of doing real lessons with kids, collecting data. We have a meeting in middle of April, right after we get back from spring break, for them to kind of share their findings with the group, to kind of figure out what we want to do going forward. You know, obviously there are still concerns, right? We have a fundamental series of beliefs about teaching and learning, that we need kids to become good writers and mastering writing. We don't want them to always use AI and take shortcuts. We have some teachers at the high school who are very concerned about kids using AI to cheat, right? So we're really having those discussions internally with our teachers, our professionals, to sort of figure out where it makes sense in education and where it doesn't, and where we need to sort of provide some limits. You know, our belief is that we really need to use schools as a training ground for adult life and for life after high school and college and workforce. So we believe we have somewhat of a responsibility to teach kids about it, teach them how to use it responsibly. And also, there are some pretty profound things. We have some teachers who are using it to more personalized learning for students. So, for example, if you have a 8th grader who's not reading on grade level, they might be reading at a 5th grade level, but you want them to be able to access the social studies content. They can use some of these AI tools and take the same textbook content and get it to a readable format for that student. So how profound that is for a teacher to really be able to have those students access the curriculum. We even have a special ed teacher who's part of our AI cohort now. So we've been doing work almost, it'll be 2 years this summer, but we're sort of meeting and trying to stay, I can't say on top of it because there's no way to stay on top of it, but we're trying to be methodical and really approach it from a teaching and learning and curriculum standpoint and not like, oh, just try out this great tool. So
that was a great answer. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it.
I love talking about it.
Anybody else? We're good with specific questions. If you asked a question tonight and you're waiting for follow-up, if you could send me just a quick email to remind me if I missed anything written down so I can follow up. And I think our first selectman would like to speak also, so I'll turn it over to her.
I promise I won't be long. To all of you especially. So I believe that most of you in this room know I'm a longtime education advocate. Beginning just a short 32 years ago, when my children started their educational career in Trumbull at Tashua School, as Jackie well knows. So any decrease to the Board of Ed request is very difficult for me. And I take my decisions extremely seriously. As Dr. Semmel said, I continue to fight for more state funding for education. Last year, we did receive an additional $1 million of ECS funding through my administration's advocacy, and I'm hoping we can do the same thing this year, but of course, there are no guarantees that will happen. This is a very challenging year for most towns in Connecticut, and Trumbull is no exception. Inflationary pressures and high interest rates continue to impact expenses for both the town and the Board of Education, as we all well know. What has made this year even more challenging is a decrease to the town's grand list. This is important because the grand list plays a crucial role in determining our property tax rate. A decrease in our grand list in Trumbull is very unusual, especially after having real growth last year of nearly 1%. So you may ask, how is that possible? So what happened is actually explained in my budget letter, which I'm sure you all have read backwards and forwards at this point. On page 8 of my letter, I explain that the growth was offset by two factors. One was two major tax appeals, resulting in a lower value of these properties of over $53 million. Second was a change to the motor vehicle assessments from the Connecticut General Assembly. Starting last October, vehicles are now valued using the MSRP. And according to the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, CCM, the 2024 change in motor vehicle valuation has caused a huge decrease in motor vehicle assessments as a component of grand lists in every community across the state. As of this date, the state has not allocated any funds to offset the impact of the motor vehicle valuation change. A proposal is under consideration to provide relief to affected communities, including Trumbull. But since this legislation has not been signed by the governor, and that's a whole nother story, as we know, I can't include any potential savings in my budget at this time. So, A few other things to remember at this point in the budget process. My allocation this year is the second highest allocation over the last 14 years. However, I am not dismissing the rising expenses for both the town and the Board of Education. This is the first step in the budget process. I can only budget with the information I know at this time, as I said. There may be changes over the next few months that will impact my budget numbers, including the health insurance premium and, as I said, a change to how motor vehicles are valued for tax purposes. Funding education, as I said, is one of my highest priorities. However, I must balance the needs of everyone in our community. I will continue to work with Dr. Semmel and the Board of Education, the Board of Finance, and the Town Council to achieve the best possible outcome for our students, our teachers, the staff, and members of our community. So thank you for letting me. Silence are now going.
I promise that they're not coming to pull the fire alarm.
Oh,
I
I
promise.
thought maybe Santa Claus was making an appearance. I don't know. But anyways, thank you for letting me speak for a few minutes.
Okay, so we had a bunch of follow-up questions. I'll make sure that we coordinate to get the information, and if there's any other questions after the meeting, I will send them your way. Anybody have any last-minute questions for this evening? Maria, there was an email also that Scott had sent. He was looking for some numbers ahead of our next budget hearings. Our next Board of Finance budget hearing with the town departments will be next Tuesday, the 11th. That meeting is actually via Zoom. We started that during COVID, and it seemed to be a really efficient way to meet with the town departments. It's also a great way for the community to be able to watch those meetings. They're really tedious and long, but we get a lot of good information. So I wanted to just make sure that people know that that's available. And I wanted to acknowledge all of the staff and administrators that are sitting here in this room tonight, many of whom have touched my family personally. And we're very thankful that we have such dedicated staff in this town. And thank you for being here tonight. If nobody has anything else for this evening, an hour ahead of our curfew, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Marty. Anybody else not want to go home? All right. Good night, everyone.
All right. See, it was bad. Yeah, it was.